Um, hi everyone. I'm Danielle. I'm presenting here counter narratives. I'm just going to tell you why this is important for me before we move to the outline and the rest of the presentation. So I'm a Chilean immigrant in the U.S. I came to the U.S. to get a master's degree, and then I stayed for a PhD, and now I'm married and I have a family in Minnesota. And counter narratives are important for me as a person first, and then as a father who wants his child, his multiracial child, to live in a society where he sees stories that he can relate to, that he's a Latino and Asian child. So I want him to be seen as a full person, not just in all the stories as either a criminal or a party person or a ninja or whatever images of Asians and Latinos people might have, but to see himself as having different opportunities and different avenues to follow any kind of path that he wants. And now Isha is going to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm co-presenting with Danielle. My name is Chen. I am the Learning Centers Manager at Literacy Minnesota. Um, let's see, counter narratives. Well, this is a very important topic for me personally because as Danielle, I can relate to Danielle. Growing up, I didn't see images of myself represented in the media. And when they were represented, oftentimes they were characters like Mickey Rooney and Breakfast at Tiffany, white characters in yellow face are, there was really racist tropes, particularly directed towards Asian women as being hypersexualized or the dragon lady. And that really affected me socially as well as me personally, like my self image and the way that people related to me throughout my life. And so it took me a while to really be critical of these messages that we get from majoritarian stories or narratives. We'll go into that later. But as Danielle said, and so we're actually married. Danielle and I are married. We're in different rooms. And as you said, we have a multiracial child. And it's really important for me, really critical that he feels like he sees himself in society and media and stories, and we're working really hard to fill our home with these this media, these stories, these picture books that tell stories that aren't just um, stereotypes or negative images of Latinos and Asians.
I don't see the screen. All right. So a brief thing about the outline. I'm just going to briefly talk about what counter stories are and what's the goal of the counter stories. Then a little bit about critical race theory and experiential knowledge and how this all relates to counter stories. Then we're gonna have a little breakout room for you to talk to the peers that you're going to encounter there. And then we're gonna talk a little bit about community cultural wealth. And then Ishu is going to navigate you through counter stories in mainstream media, and then how you can use counter stories in the ABE classroom. Just give me 1 second here. All right, so hmm, Lindsay, thank you. So counter stories, they stem from critical race theory. You might have heard about this last month when former President Trump was trying to get rid of CRT and of all social justice related training. There's nothing wrong with it. The what CRT does is to challenge the majoritarian stories that Issue just mentioned, the dominant ideologies and the usual liberal claims of racial neutrality, equal opportunity, objectivity, color blindness, merit, and other stories that are part of American society. So if you work hard, you're going to make it. You're going to go to a great college and on all of that American dream narrative that everyone is very familiar with, including new immigrants who might be in your classrooms. Now, the problem with that is those are narratives. There's no real reason for you to believe that with just working hard, you're going to make it to the University of Minnesota, or that you're going to have a great job after that. So CRT challenges these narratives, these majoritarian stories, and centralizes the experiences and then the stories of minoritized people rather than the pervasive master narrative. And instead of using minority, we choose to use the word minoritized, because these people are pushed to the margins and they cannot control that. So it's out of their control because they cannot even tell their own stories. So counter stories also comes out of a critical pedagogy, and probably the most famous theories from critical pedagogy was Paulo Freire, a Brazilian philosopher, whose whole idea was to teach peasants in Brazil to read the world, not just to read the word or the words in the text or in a book or anything, but to really understand how society works and how to work together for social transformation. So the final goal of counter stories as part of critical race theory is social transformation. So is to change what is seen as truth. And then the relationship or another relationship to it is with decolonial pedagogies in recognizing oppression and its multiple forms, and then taking action in the classroom to interrupt these cycles of oppression. So counter storytellers are not just used to provide minoritized stories about race, but they can also be about class, they can be about gender, they can be about sexual orientation or any other identity that is not dominant in American society. Next one, please, Lindsay. Issue is going to tell you a little bit about this one.
Yeah, so some of you already know about this author, maybe many of you actually. She's quite famous for a couple of her novels. One of my favorite is Americana. This is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, I believe. She's originally from Nigeria. This is from one of her famous TED Talks about the dangers of a single story. I'm just going to let you watch this clip, and then I'll just make a couple comments right after.
For just $67, you can make as many videos as you want, and you never need to pick up a camera.
I'm a storyteller, and I would like to tell you a few personal stories about what I like to call the danger of the single story. I grew up on a university campus in Eastern
Lindsay,
Nigeria.
do you mind stopping
My
for a
mother says
second?
that I started reading at the age of...
Could you start from 3 minutes and I believe 30 seconds? Ugh, I'm not sure. 3 minutes, 10 seconds?
As was the norm, living domestic help who would often come from nearby rural villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and our old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit. And his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me as an African was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. I must say that before I went to the US, I didn't consciously identify as African.
All right, could you
But
stop
in the
right there,
US,
Lindsay?
whenever Africa came up, people turned to me, never.
All right, thank you so much for your patience. We actually had this clip from where we wanted to begin to end in our other Canva presentation, but it just didn't translate for PowerPoint. So thank you for your patience. Yeah, so, you know, what I really love about Chimamanda Adichie is that her literature really shows, and what I loved about Americana is that really shows the characters who are all, the protagonists who are all, the main one is actually Nigerian, a Nigerian woman, and it shows her in full human light. All of the complexities that come with being a woman, a, a person, a human, and really shift the gaze from being from the white gaze to a really kind of African female-centric one, which I think is really important. And Chimamande's message was really striking to me, and really thinking about how we've internalized a lot of these really limiting stereotypes about others, whether it's negative or whatnot, and limits us in understanding kind of the complexities and the fullness of who other people are. So I just really love this story that she shares. And the whole TED Talk is actually available on YouTube as well as the TED Talk website. It's about 17 or 20 minutes long.
Thank you. I was just responding to Emily, who had an interesting comment about a Somali family moving from Johannesburg to St. Paul and not having necessarily to learn how to use a stove, but to learn how to live in a smaller city. So back to critical race theory and what they aim to do. So critical race theory comes from legal studies, and then it evolved into different fields. It went into education, sociology, anthropology. A lot of fields in the humanities use theories to understand American society. And one of the things that is good for us to understand here in terms of majoritarian stories and something that relates to education is what people understand as the academic achievement gap. So that's a majoritarian story, that there is this gap between Black, indigenous, and people of color when you compare it to white students, especially when they get to college. So there's always a conversation of, oh, how we're going to help them, what are we going to do to decrease this academic gap and all of that. But what we fail to see is the non-majoritarian story, which some authors refer to as the educational debt. So the educational debt is a cumulative impact of fewer resources and other harm directed at students of color. So students of color tend to live in poorer school districts, so they don't have access to the same education. And they also, like Issue mentioned, they don't see many other educators, or they don't of like their own, they don't see themselves reflected in the curriculum, and they do not have the same opportunities to advance. That this can be in terms of AP classes, PSEO classes, or anything like that. So that also explains why some American-born students are enrolled in ABE classes, and it might be because they didn't feel that the schooling system was serving them. Something might have happened during their childhood or during their teenager years that they were like, you know what, I'm just gonna leave school. It's not that they were necessarily bad students, but they were pushed out. Some other authors or some other researchers would claim that there's that schools push out students of color. This is definitely different for immigrant families, but there's still different stories that we tell ourselves about who comes to America, what kind of practices they have, and why they come here. Um, but that Mediterranean story speaks more about American educational system. And then below, I listed some of the tenets of CRT. So one of them is a permanence of racism, and that is very visible in the way that it operates in American society. And you can just see that with police brutality, with the unequal number of prisoners who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color, and other issues. Also, the challenge to these dominant ideologies, which is one of the main goals for CRT, interest convergence, which means that things get to be done when it's convenient for both the BIPOC and the white people. So if it's not convenient, we're not going to have a conversation about the issue. Then race as a social construct, intersectionality and anti-essentialism, interdisciplinarity, which I just mentioned. These theories work in many different fields, and the centrality of experiential knowledge, which speaks to what we're trying to do here, which is working with the students to tell their own story. So who are they? Who is this person in the introductory level of English, or who is the one who's already in the, I don't know, the intermediate level, but I don't really know who this person is. Like, I might not know where his family is from, or what languages they speak, or many other aspects that can not only be really illuminating for us, but really can provide elements of engagement that might make them feel like seen and heard and validated in an ABE classroom. And finally, the commitment to social justice, which theorizes that by centralizing these stories, we will actually be able to see who the students are and humanize them, and see them as a full human being, and not just a student who needs to learn something from us. Lindsay, thank you. So this was a really introductory, how do you call it? Introduction. My words are leaving me. But a very short introduction to what counter stories and CRT are. But you definitely have many stories that people don't know about you. So in this first breakout, I just want you to, you're going to be there with different people. Just take a minute to introduce yourself to the group. Tell something that they wouldn't know just by looking at you. So for example, I can give you my own example. You can definitely or probably see that I'm Latino, and I just told you at the beginning that I'm a PhD candidate and I came to the US to get a master's degree. So you could assume that I come from money. The reality is that I was working class. My mom, up until before the pandemic, was still working as a nanny. So I never had um, the wealth or the financial capital to afford things in the US. I had tuition remission, and I worked for my master's, and I was a TA when I was in the doctoral program and all, but that's something that you wouldn't know if you don't ask me how I was able to afford for that. So just tell these people in your room something that they wouldn't know about you just by the minute they meet you. Then tell them maybe why you think counter narratives are important. then how you can give learners, any kind of learners you have, opportunities to author their own stories. And finally, what other country stories have you seen these past years? Because there is like a growing number of series and books and many other media that have come out in the last years that centralize kind of like not news stories, but stories that where the characters or the writers are people of color. So you'll have 10 minutes. Lindsay is gonna put you in different breakout rooms. She's going to copy and paste the questions there, and you're gonna have a 1 minute warning when you are already gone for 9 minutes. So then you will be back in the main room.
All right, we will open the rooms now. And if you don't end up in a room, don't panic. I'll help you get there. So here we go.
Thank you. Thank you. So if you don't mind going back to the previous slide. Thank you. So yeah, I just wanted to hear a little bit from you all, what you talked about. You can chat into the box. Otherwise, maybe I can take one or two people who would like to share out as well. I don't think you have to raise your hand. Just unmute yourself and I guess share why counter stories are important and how you think that you could uh, use counter stories with learners so that they can author their own stories. Great, I see that there's a book recommendation for A Good Time for the Truth. That one's really fantastic. I highly recommend it as well. Yeah, it's basically a book of essays from various Minnesota-based authors, activists, historians, and they're all BIPOC, just narrating different aspects of their life and identity, and it's very good. So yes, the Journeys anthology is a great way for learners to express their stories. Someone's asking for recommended questions to prompt. We can talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. We'll be talking about just strategies in the ABE Classroom, but that's definitely a good question. Thank you for bringing that up. All right, well.
So I can, one thing that I was thinking about as someone who teaches lower literacy and lower level, and there's not a lot of stories out there, and thinking about when I was in a classroom, how oftentimes I would write stories for my students and about my students. And the difference between like myself as a white educator writing stories versus having stories that come from the students and what assumptions were being put in to the stories when I was the person writing them.
Thanks so much for sharing, Andrea. Yeah, I think, really thinking about and reflecting on our own biases because as good as our attentions are, like we see the world through a different lens than anyone else, regardless of their race, sexuality, social economic level. We see the world differently, and it really impacts the way that we might interpret data as well. And code data. So I think it's really important that stories come directly from learners. And whatever methodology you have to use, maybe finding advanced learners who act as translators or hiring translators as well. I've translated stories from Spanish using professional translators, and it was much more enriching. And in my opinion, because their cadence is different in their home language, the way they express themselves, the words they use, sometimes are more rich and have more depth and meaning. And sometimes those things are lost when they're speaking in a second, a third, or fourth language. All right, so we can, oh, it looks like there's some more comments. Someone's working on a personal opinion essay with their students, learner experience approach. So that's from Andrea. Great, so we can move on to the next slide.
All right, so this can be, well, I'm going to tell you first what community cultural wealth is, and then even for beginner levels, you can see how this might fit some of your classes or some of the activities or the writing that some of your students could complete to create a biography or an autoethnography or a memoir or a storytelling project. So community cultural wealth is a response to the theories of cultural capital that tell you that as long as you get enough cultural capital, you can have more social capital, and then you're gonna have financial capital. So basically, the whole idea of getting education and getting access to more and more things, which works when you have the ability to go to a good school and you don't have to worry about food or about I don't know, being an essential working these days and having to make a decision between your health and your occupation. So community cultural wealth is the range of knowledge, skills, abilities, and contacts possessed, passed down, and used by communities of color to survive and resist oppression, or to survive and resist in any country in reality. So all these forms of capital are aspirational capital, familial, linguistic, navigational, resistant, and social capital. Lindsay? So in terms of aspirational capital, is your dreams, who you want to become, what you hope to be one day, and what is your vision for the future. So a basic question can be, what do you want to be in the future, or who is your hero? What would you like to become? Like what vocation or profession would you like to pursue? Then in terms of familial capital, is the family, nations, or nationalities that you're related to, the cultural elements, family work, and family pics. So how can you represent your family? Who are your parents or your guardians, or who do you consider family? Then linguistic capital, that this would definitely work with immigrant students, but also with non-immigrant ones. So what are your languages, your stories, your narratives? What kind of Englishes can you speak? How do you, I don't know, how can you code switch from talking to your friends to being in a class, or to being in a more formal situation? Then navigational capital, which is what kind of social institutions do you know how to navigate? So thinking about immigrant students who are in ABE, how did they navigate becoming refugees or becoming immigrants, and how they're currently navigating the schooling system or the classes that they're taking with you. So that shows that they have the capital or the ideas to know how to navigate these different systems. Then resistant capital, so in what ways they are motivated by justice, and what do they care about, and what do they want to change. And finally, social capital, who do they know, how do they connect to them, network with, or share resources with. So how do they help other people to also navigate the American society, or the English the English language classroom, or the schooling for their children, or an employment application. So how do they navigate all of these different elements of community cultural wealth? And taking this into account, you can think of simple and not so simple questions that you could ask your students. And then once they begin writing, they might realize that they have capital that they haven't probably thought before, that they're not necessarily always looking for help in the US or for help in the English class. They also have something to relate, and they might have commonalities with the other classmates, and they might have commonalities with you. You might speak a common language that might not be English, or you might like the same sport, or you might have the same aspirations. So you might find a lot other ways to connect with your students that only just this teaching or volunteer and student relationship. Lindsay?
Great. So, what are some examples of counter stories in media? I know that you probably covered this a little bit in your breakout rooms, but here's some of my favorites. I'm kind of addicted to streaming services. Ask Danielle. When we put men to sleep, I'm like on Netflix binge watching something. I'm sure a lot of you can relate, especially during the pandemic. But you'll see that counter narratives are becoming much more mainstreamed and part of what we watch collectively. And I think that's such a shift to maybe 20 or 30 years ago. When I was very young, I didn't see people on TV who looked like me. I watched, what did I watch? Like Friends, I watched Little House on the Prairie. So all of the characters did not represent me, did not represent my community. And, I believe that these were the images these were the people who deserved to be on TV, and that people who look like myself and my mother, my father did not. And so these messages get internalized at a very young age. And it's very subconscious. And so I'm really excited at the trend that we're moving towards with more diverse casting, diverse stories and narratives and producers. So all of these titles here um, are produced by people of color. So they're telling stories of individuals who they might know in their own communities, their families, their own experiences, and maybe fictionalizing them in different characters. Um, Ugly Delicious is one of my favorites. It's David Chang. He is a world-renowned chef, and he presents Asian food in cast it in a very different light. Um, he like problematizes how we see food and how the Michelin star or whatever works, and really favors like Western style cuisine. When in fact, he points out in his show that a lot of Asian cuisine, if you look intrinsically, is just as amazing as European food. Or Western food, sometimes more intrinsic, sometimes more complicated and complex. Um, Rami depicts a Muslim American man who experiences a lot of the trials and tribulations of being a second gen immigrant, family of immigrant, Muslim, but also what it means to be a young 20 something person living in the US, and shows a lot of just that and normalizes his story and doesn't just depict him as a terrorist, which is a common trope. Um, Another one I'm just going to point out is Lovecraft Country. So Danielle and I both binge watch this. This is fantastic. This is on HBO Max. It's a short one series show, and it's basically a compilation of H.P. Lovecraft's pulp fiction novels, but it's produced by Peele's production studio, and he was also the producer of Get Out. If you've ever seen it, it's fantastic. Um, and if you know anything about H.P. Lovecraft, he was a renowned, very vehement racist. So it's really reclaiming that narrative and like showing it from the gaze of a Black person or Black people and protagonists, making them the heroes, even though in the show you'll see, I don't want to give spoilers, but some of them are actually become monsters or get very enmeshed with monsters in the show. Um, and so it really flips the narrative. And these are just maybe in your classrooms as ABE instructors, you can use these as launching off points for talking about counter narratives, of eliciting stories, of showing that you can have complicated stories, no matter who you are. And I think that's just a wonderful thing. I just love where the media is going.
All right, so you should mention these very complicated stories, these stories that are being transformed where with new characters. And also I just wanted to everyone knows Spider-Man and everyone knows Peter Parker, probably one of the favorite comic characters for children of all ages. But recently, I think it was 2018, there was this new movie for Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse with a new character. So I just want Lindsay to play probably a minute of the bottom clip. Not yeah, that one. Thanks.
It's Aspen Dental's Everyday Smiles event, where new patients get a full exam and set of x-rays with no obligation.
Miles!
Yeah.
Gotta go!
If you want me to drive you, we gotta go now.
No, Dad, I'll walk.
Personal chauffeur going once.
It's okay.
Seriously, Dad, walking would have been fine.
Breaking news, Spider-Man saves the day again.
Spider-Man. This guy swings in once a day, zip, zap, zop, Nancy. Accountability.
Speed up. I know these kids.
Yo, Miles, man, you get arrested?
Gosh, don't cops run red lights?
Well, yeah, some do. But, not your dad.
In your universe, there's only one Spider-Man. But there is another universe. It looks and sounds like yours, but it's not. My name's Miles Morales.
Hey, kid. You're like me. How?
I knew my day would come around this time.
I know it's complicated.
Just had to cleanse my soul and free my mind.
You want to know what happened to you? I can teach you to be Spider-Man. I love this burger. It's so delicious.
Thank you, Lindsay. So we can see the interaction there with the original Spider-Man, Peter Parker, and the new Spider-Man, Miles Morales. And then they're talking about different universes. Lindsay, could you go to to the next one, please? So in talking about these universes, if you know anything about this movie, the different Spider-Mans live in different universes, and then they create a multiverse, and all the stories are related to each other. And when we see people and we see their stories, like we all have stories, and I tell Yixiu a story, then she might tell this story to someone else. We create a whole universe of different things. And for me, this is just like seeing a peanut, like on this slide, the one that you can actually see the peanut, and seeing the peanut when it's growing. So the peanut is a rhizome. And a rhizome is something that is always evolving and that is always going in different ways, in different directions, and intersecting with each other and creating new rhizomes. So these stories create new stories. Your students might create a story. Some of the other students might read it and relate to it, and really see how everyone has the power to author their own stories, and they can, in a way, counter the stories that other people are telling about themselves. So becoming an author via counter stories is not only a matter of becoming a writer, but also seeing yourself as someone who is actually an author, and someone who is actually able to tell the story that really reflects who you are, and that reflects that your story and your life is always in motion. It's you're always becoming someone else. So yeah, I was in the process of becoming a PhD, but I was also in the process of becoming a father. I'm also in the process of, I don't know what else I'm becoming, but I'm always in the process of doing something else. So I think that's also important to emphasize, that in creating any kind of story, these stories are going to be related in a rhizomatic way. Lindsay? And this is Yixiu.
Great. Yeah, so Daniel went through a lot of theory and kind of explaining a lot of the theories that go behind counter stories, CRT, critical race theory. Um, we just wanted to bring it back to the ABE classroom. How can you integrate some of these ideas practically into the classroom? So one of them is through digital storytelling. So this typically includes some combination of the following. So that's digital graphics, video clips, recorded audio narration, and or music. It's a very powerful tool for teaching and learning that engages teachers and learners both. And it really builds literacy skills, digital presenting, organizing, writing, researching skills. The skills are very like you can use this with multiple levels of ESL learners as well as other folks who might be in the GED program, for example, or even in a North Star class, I would say, digital literacy class. It's really related. And, learners are co-constructing knowledge or constructing knowledge and sharing it with the classroom. So the power dynamic is just, it's not one-sided from, it's very Freudian thought of, or this countering, this Freudian thought that the teacher or the educator has all the power in the class and is trying to insert knowledge into a blank slated pupil. No, it's a symbiotic relationship, and the teachers are learning from students, learners are learning from each other. And so it's a very dynamic process. Um, so I actually ran a couple digital storytelling workshops with immigrants and refugee students. One time with it was in an inner city school in Western Massachusetts with um, refugee students in middle school. Second time was here, and it was college or high school students past 18 who were both immigrants and refugees, mostly East African. Um, and they really have the autonomy to share what stories are told and how they're told, what images and narration to use, and the ways that they want to express themselves, whether it's through poetry, whether it's through music. They're the ones who are really in control of that, which is the process itself is actually as important as the product. And this is something that I learned that I didn't expect. The process in itself can be a gateway for healing to happen, for deep conversations to happen, for reflection to happen from all people who are involved in the process. Um, and it's really important that whoever's facilitating um, is able to hold that space to make it safe, and because sometimes painful memories might be shared. And so I think that's something just to keep in mind. Curriculum design, I'm not going to go into this too much because this is like a whole series in itself, I think. But just thinking about how curriculum design can include learners, community members in the co-creation. Um, and also just classroom design as well in general. How can you include learners in the process of designing the classroom, of moving it and designing the program? Um, let's see, like there's a few websites that I could recommend. The Change Agent is a good one. They have a lot of lesson plans, teaching tolerance. And just note that curriculum is not something that's fixed, but it's really like this living dynamic process that is often interrogated and revised to accommodate the learner's needs, or it should be, based on changing environment and values. Photo voice. I love photo voice because it's really low tech, and you can just have a camera. A lot of folks have I don't know, smartphones now. You can even get disposable cameras and put them in the hands of learners, and they can take photographs of things that they want to, whatever they want to in their lives, whether it's themselves, family, objects, nature, and provide some sort of accompanying narrative, some sort of caption to it to express what this picture means in their viewpoint. Um, and sometimes it expresses the community's socioeconomic realities, their own realities. Um, there's a really great documentary. It's called Born in Brothels. It came out a while ago, but it basically the documentarists um, put a bunch of these disposable cameras in the hands of children who were born from from people, women who were prostitutes in Mumbai, and so if you can imagine, pretty marginalized. Uh, a lot of them lived in pretty impoverished environments, and they took pictures of whatever they wanted, and they narrated, and they provide narration, and these pictures made it all across the world into these really fancy studios, and really provided people a window into someone else's life from these children's lives. And some of these images were not what they expected. They showed happiness, they just showed joy, they showed the innocence of childhood. And I think that's just fabulous because, you know, a lot of times the majority in stories are coming from a very deficit viewpoint of the minoritized population, or maybe some of the, you can say some of the learners that are served within ABE fields. So this process really helps to push back against that and problematizes those narratives and says, hey, you know, we're not just this sad basket case story, you know, this tragic story. We have joy in our lives. We have the same struggles as anyone else. And I think that's the power. For me, that's the power of counter stories. And critical participatory action research. I'm not going to go into this too much. Daniel knows way more about this. Actually, this is the methodology he's used before in some of his papers. But basically, it's a method to challenge racism, sexism, classism, other types of isms in the realm of education and beyond. It's a methodology that might be able to translate into classroom design as well. It's really, the basis is to co-design research with participants, and really focused on social action and change as a result of the research. So the next slide. So the bottom left-hand corner, this is Sada. I have permission to share this. She was a student of mine, and she had a wonderful photo story series. And this is just a quote from her overall captioning. We often misjudge people or cultures based on a single story, but we never try to learn the whole story before we make assumptions. And you know, she was just a wonderful, beautiful person, and had such a great outlook in life. And yeah, I was so impressed with her work as well. The right hand corner, this is Samir. Would you mind, this is a example of a digital story. Would you mind playing this film, Lindsay? Oh, is it not playing? I guess it's not playing. That's okay.
Don't know if it's linked, or am I not?
Yeah, it's not linked.
Oh, shoot. Well, you know what? We can always watch it later. Danielle, do you mind just grabbing it? I don't know if you have the YouTube channel for it, and we could just put that inside the link, or I'm sorry, inside the chat box.
Yeah, I can link it later.
Okay. Yeah, so yeah, sorry about that. So yeah, Samir's story, he is an Oromo refugee, and he it just tells his immigration story. And he mixes in images, um, narration over the pictures. I'm not sure if he has music. He has some text. some graphics, and it's just like a really wonderful, simple, like 2-minute story. But this is something that you could do with students as well. There's a lot of free software out there that you could just upload. There's apps now. Um, when I first got into digital storytelling, it was like 6, 7 years ago. And it was kind of like very avant-garde back then. But now you see all these kids making TikToks and having their own stories, online, and they're just producing it so quickly and they look so polished. And so technology has gotten a lot better and it's really at our fingertips. And I definitely think that we need to utilize these tools more in the classroom. So we're going to be going into a breakout room. So this is going to be 10 minutes long with a 1-minute warning, I believe. So how could you bring counter stories to your work with students and your circles of influence? What are some majoritarian stories that you would like to challenge in your own life and in your teaching? And lastly, what do you want your students to learn about themselves and their stories? So Lindsay's put them into the chat. You'll be going back into the same groups, and we'll be bringing you back shortly.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to go with about 8 minutes total because we're running short. So here we go, everyone.
All right.
Sure. Thank you, Marisa. So thank you, everyone, for engaging into the conversation in the 2 breakout rooms. Running out of time, I just wanted to share some resources there. They're mostly coming from Rethinking Schools. I believe most of them. You can modify them. That will give you an idea of what you can do with some of these resources. If you cannot access it through the PowerPoint, I'm pretty sure they're linked in the PDF, and they're also linked in the folder with the resources. And finally, Lindsay, we go to the next slide? Yeah. Finally, thank you. Yixiu and myself are happy that you were here. We hope that you're able to utilize some of the resources or some of the ideas in your own classes. If you have any questions, just don't hesitate to contact her. Her contact information is there. She works for Literacy Minnesota, or you can contact me too. I don't work in literacy per se, even though I do, but I work for the U of M mostly with college students who also have a need to use counter stories to really tell who they are to a very predominantly white institution. So that's probably my next role in the coming years. It's like bringing their stories also to the center at the U of M.
Yeah, thank you all so much for your time and for joining this session this late afternoon it's Thursday. I was thinking it was Friday. Oh my gosh. Yeah, time's a blur now. Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to email us. There's a lot of different resources, articles. The slides are also inside the participants folder. That's part of the whole program. Just go to Counter Stories folder and you'll find it there. And sorry, I'm getting a call from work. And thank you all and have a nice day.
Thanks, everyone. I put the link to the flyer in there, and that's, again, on the flyer at the top is where you'll find the link to the participant materials folder. It also has links to the affinity groups that are coming up if you would like to participate in one of those. Otherwise, we will see you hopefully back tomorrow morning. So thank you so much, everyone. Thanks to our presenters.